Good evening. The October 25th, 2021 meeting of the Roseville Independent Redistricting Commission is called to order. Clerk, will you please call roll?
Borowak?
Here.
Cuthbertson?
Here.
Frank?
Here.
Griffith?
Here.
Ludwig?
Here.
McPhail?
Here.
O'Keefe?
Here.
Sweeney? Here. Wagner?
Here.
Waldrop?
Here.
Willoughby?
Here.
Commission alternates Donner?
Here.
Slaughter?
Here.
And it appears Krafka and Kuhn are absent.
All right, thank you. Commissioner O'Keefe, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Happy to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We are doing things a little bit out of order tonight, I think. So we have some resolutions to consider, which would allow us to do the call-in for public comment. So item number 3.1.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Frank and members of the Commission. My name is Joe Mandel from the City Attorney's Office. As Chair Frank mentioned, this first item tonight before you is an administrative matter related to the Brown Act and whether the Independent Redistricting Commission would like to allow remote telephonic participation by the public in its meetings. So this is a little bit of a procedural item, but I want to make sure we hit all of the items, and I want to help explain it. And if any of you have questions throughout the process, feel free to ask me. So as you recall from our prior discussions about the Brown Act, the focus of the Brown Act is on open meetings and public participation and the right and ability for the public to attend public meetings. When COVID was spreading throughout California in March of 2020, the governor issued a series of executive orders that were aimed at slowing the spread of COVID, and those executive orders modified certain requirements of the Brown Act. So those executive orders were issued in March of 2020, and they waived certain things like requiring the physical presence of you all, members of the legislative body, requiring the physical presence of us as staff and recording secretaries and legal counsel, as well as it didn't require the physical presence of attendees at the meeting. So those were some of the changes from the governor's executive order. And what this meant from a practical perspective for local agencies is that for the time being under the governor's executive order, local agencies were required to allow members of the public to observe and address public meetings via telephone or otherwise electronically. So this became the Zoom era and the Microsoft Teams meeting era, where the public was allowed to participate with video comment or telephone comment rather than in-person public comment like we would normally have. So just as a reminder, the Independent Redistricting Commission has been meeting since May of 2021. The governor's executive orders went into effect in March of 2020. So the entire time that this commission has been meeting, we've always been under the governor's executive orders, which allowed remote or teleconference meetings. So now let's fast forward a little bit. Over the summer in June, the governor issued a new executive order which rescinded all of the temporary modifications to the Brown Act effective September 30th. So on June 15th, the governor, he terminated several of the executive orders related to COVID pandemic response. So back in June, there was no more restrictions on social distancing, physical distancing. The capacity limits in businesses and restaurants went away. The local tiered county, colored system went away related to COVID. So basically, as of October 1st, all local agencies were required to go back to the Brown Act requirements as they existed pre-COVID. On September 16th, the governor signed Assembly Bill 361, and that's kind of our discussion here tonight, because AB 361 amended California Government Code Section 54953, and it provides authority and specific requirements for public agencies to hold virtual meetings during a proclaimed state of emergency and still remain in compliance with the Brown Act. AB 361 became applicable on October 1st, and it will sunset on January 1st of 2024. Our last IRC meeting was on September 27th, so the requirements of AB 361 were not applicable at our last meeting, but now they obviously are. So what does AB 361 change about our process, and why is it an item on our agenda tonight? So again, AB 361 provides local agencies with the ability to meet remotely during proclaimed state emergencies under modified Brown Act requirements, similar in many ways to the rules and procedures that were in place back when the governor had enacted the prior executive orders. At our last meeting on September 27th, there was a discussion amongst some of the members about the logistics and the ability to continue providing and authorizing remote participation in the meetings by accepting remote telephonic public comment. And that's why this item's on your agenda tonight for consideration. So really moving forward, what we have to look at is this. If the Independent Redistricting Commission wishes to authorize remote participation in its meetings by accepting remote telephonic public comment, it needs to comply with the new provisions of AB 361. And so I'm going to walk you through some of those. But it's very important to note here that AB 361 only applies to meetings that are held during a state of emergency as declared by the governor. So if COVID goes away for whatever reason tomorrow or January or 5 years from now, whatever it is, that would be when AB 361 is only applicable till January 2024. But still, only applicable now during state of emergencies as declared by the governor. So yes, we have that here. Public participation and convenience for the public, those types of things, those are not really the driving factors behind AB 361 and the legislative intent. It's primarily about remote meetings during periods of emergency. If you look back in August and September timeframe, and many parts of the state of California were on fire, and just to use an example of like the city of South Lake Tahoe, unable to physically meet due to the fact that half of their city was on fire. And so AB 361 provided a great opportunity for them to be able to meet remotely. There are several requirements if a local legislative body wants to meet remotely. And when I say meeting remotely, it's the difference between everybody's here in this room right now, all of the public, everyone would be physically here speaking to us. And so if we want to allow something beyond that, we would have to be in compliance with these new provisions of AB 361. Let's go through the roadmap here. AB 361 applies only to meetings during a state of emergency as declared by the governor. Again, yes, we have that here. As we continue through the analysis, we need to determine now whether there are any social distancing measures imposed or recommended by state or local officials. And I can tell you that there's not any no current physical distancing requirements in place if they're at the state or county local level. If we were in a declared state of emergency and there were physical distancing requirements in place, we'd be done. We can allow remote telephonic participation, but there's not physical distancing requirements in place, and so we need to continue down our analysis. So if the IRC wants to authorize remote participation, this is really the big item here, you need to make a finding that meeting in person would present imminent risks to the health or safety of the public or attendees of the meeting as a result of the emergency. So included in your packet, along with a staff report that I wrote that provides a little bit of further explanation on this item, there's a draft resolution for you to consider adopting tonight. So feel free to turn to that and flip through it right now for more background. That's a draft resolution for you guys to consider tonight. That draft resolution makes several findings, including the fact that the governor has declared a state of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic. The draft resolution also notes that there are still unknown impacts of COVID-19 and the Delta variant, specifically that the Delta variant is more transmissible than prior variants of the virus. It may cause more severe illness, and even fully vaccinated individuals can spread the virus. So, based on those circumstances noted in that draft resolution, the Independent Redistricting Commission is being asked to consider tonight whether meeting solely in person would present imminent risks to the health or safety of attendees, and thereby authorizing the remote participation of attendees via telephone. So that's the resolution that's before everyone tonight. In-person public comment would not change. Anyone is always allowed to come and attend in person. Email public comment would not change. You're still allowed to come and email anytime. And this would really only affect telephone public comment coming into the commission, I believe, when technologically feasible, which is really when we are in this meeting room in the council chambers. So this resolution that's before you, whether you would like to adopt it, this is considered an AB 361 initial resolution, and this is the one that makes the initial findings that there are immediate risks to the health or safety of the public or attendees to this meeting. If we choose to pass this resolution tonight, we need to make this finding every 30 days thereafter, because this initial resolution is only good for the first 30 days. And so every 30 days thereafter, basically every monthly meeting, we would need to confirm the circumstances of the state of the emergency and make similar required findings. So this would kind of become a standing item on our agendas every month. You can see from the staff report, there's no staff recommendation noted in here. This decision is completely up to the commission and whether or not they want to allow remote telephonic participation. For whatever it's worth, the Roseville City Council has not made any of the findings that meeting in person would present imminent risks to the health or safety of attendees of its meetings or the meetings of any of its 14 boards or commissions. So we want to recognize the independence of this commission and give you all the opportunity to discuss and debate that issue as well. So before I turn it back over for more discussion, I did want to talk about a little bit of the procedure as well, because you do have a draft resolution in front of you. You're welcome to change it up if anyone wants to, make a motion with making any changes. But what we're going to do is, after commission discussion and any in-person public comment, we'll ask for a motion to be made, and if the motion is made and seconded to adopt the attached AB 361 reso, which would allow remote telephonic participation, we would then go to a roll call vote, and it would be a majority vote which would pass or not pass this motion. Again, as a reminder, we have 11 voting members and 5 non-voting members, but the 5 non-voting members are able to discuss and deliberate this as just the same as everyone else. Any motion requires a majority to pass. This is just our first time that we've passed motions over here. So motions require a majority to pass. You are welcome to abstain from voting. Any abstention just doesn't count as a vote at all. There is just no vote cast. So let's see, in the event of a tie, a motion fails, and so we would just entertain another motion. And so that you are aware, in the event that if this resolution were to pass tonight, this kind of goes in with item 3.2 on your agenda. And so assuming hypothetically that both of those went forward, then we would be able to do telephone public comment for the remaining portion of this meeting tonight. So with all of that background, I'm going to turn it back over to Chair Frank. I'm happy to answer any sort of technical or procedural questions, or I will let you all just debate and discuss at this time.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Are there any questions regarding the presentation from commissioners?
Question. So does that cover participation of the commissioners? So let's say one of the commissioners was a close contact and needed to isolate at home for 14 days or 10 days, or if, heaven forbid, someone got it and had to be home, could they participate virtually?
This relates currently to remote telephonic participation. So everybody can watch the meetings on YouTube or on all the Sure West and Comcast channels and things like that. So really what would end up happening is you could watch it on that and call in on the phone to provide your public comment would be the easiest way to participate in that sense. Are we going to have a Teams meeting link where someone can log in? I can't promise that would happen. I don't think that's going to.
Could someone on here still vote? Would AB 361 still allow for virtual participation of a commissioner in the case that they couldn't be here? Sorry.
The Joe question.
They're within the jurisdiction, yes.
Yes, and I think yes, as long as you're there for the meeting and there for roll call and they're participating in the meeting, you would have a vote.
So, you could telephonically be there? Is that what you're saying? Or you can get back to me. I just wanted to understand, what protocol would then be for us.
Well, we do have the capability for Teams because that's how we've been holding our training. So if there was a situation where somebody was sick and wanted to participate,
Yeah.
they could participate via Teams in the little corner over there. Telephone comments would probably be fine as well.
Perfect.
It would just be difficult after you've made your comments. If there were, you'd have to stay on the line, which would preclude other calls coming
Totally.
in.
Yeah, you'd want to do it Teams-wise. I just was curious if we had to specify because it says including the public, but we don't have to go that route. I just was purely asking for us to know as well.
For whatever it's worth in the resolution, it does not specify between a commissioner and the public and things like that. It just
Perfect.
talks about remote telephonic participation.
So going to that, I have a question then. With the lifting of that first one from Governor Newsom, where we go back to in public meetings, that also then means we go back to all the rules, which if then a commissioner is not here, wouldn't they have to then post the agenda at their location?
Correct. Yes.
Just so everybody, and then that, your location has to be open to the public to come. So if you're at home, technically speaking, I say this from the school district board.
Yes.
I know
to,
this was.
Yeah, and to kind of expand on that, for the example of, let's say there were 5 members of a board and one of them was in Hawaii and still wanted to participate in the meeting in the past, you'd notice your location of I'm staying here at this hotel in this room, and the public is certainly, available to come and participate. And so that really does happen. And so COVID sort of changed everything with us being able to have these remote meetings on Zoom and Teams and things like that.
Right?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, Joe, if I'm understanding this correctly. The idea to have the, telephone option can't be solely on the basis of we want a really robust public, discussion. We want to give as many opportunities as we can for people to speak. It can't just be that. It needs to be the whole imminent danger thing about COVID and everything related
Correct.
to that.
I did write the resolution with some of those types of statements. This is a commission that only meets every 10 years. We are really highly encouraging public participation and would like the public to participate. And so in an effort to be able to do that, we are bringing this to the commission's attention so that, if they want to pass this, then yes, it would be allowing remote participation. But yes, the finding would have to be that due to imminent risk to health or safety of an attendee of this meeting, that's why you would be passing this resolution.
So the first notes I saw, you brought up a point about a disruption. And I noticed that in AB 361, is it, that the bill will require us to take no further action on the agenda items when there is a disruption which prevents the public agency from broadcasting the meeting. Is that something that applies here, that this meeting would essentially end if we lost our connection?
It's put it all on pause until you can fix the problem, is sort of what the idea is if you're having remote participation and there's an issue with the ability for the public to be able to call in, then yes, we should put everything on pause, not take any further action or items, informational items until that problem is fixed.
Okay, I would suggest to all of us that that's kind of a risk here with the timely manner in what we're doing. It seems like we're on a tight schedule, and if we had to stop at some point and we're not able to correct it, seems to me that is kind of risky at this point. That's just my opinion.
Does that apply to just the telephonic input of the public, or does that apply also to, if it's on the cable channel and the cable goes down, does that mean we have to pause, or is that's a separate item? So it's just the public's ability to participate by calling in is the thing that needs to be functioning?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah,
I just want to say that.
Think that's something that could happen, or is the phone a pretty secure thing in terms of
Well, it's worked for 19 months.
Okay. So it's been
We're pretty
tested.
confident.
The phone is a secure thing. Think about all of the various, I think there's 485 different cities in the state. So all of the various meetings that have gone on in COVID, and there has been technical difficulties at least one time during one of those Zoom meetings where, the public was not able to participate, but action still went on. So that was part of the reason for putting that if there is a distraction or a disruption, pause the meeting, stop everything until we can get everything back and working correctly.
Any other questions?
Can I just clarify, Joe, are we being asked tonight not to qualify the state of emergency, because that's been declared, but that we, as the IRC, find an additional clear and imminent reason to allow telephonic
Correct. It's
access?
basically, if there is a state of emergency, yes, check that box, we can move further. And then you look into, is there physical distancing, social distancing requirements? No. And so therefore, if the local body wants to allow remote participation, you have to make a finding that there is imminent risk to the health or safety of attendees of your meeting.
Yeah, I'm a little confused as far as, does this mean these meetings in this location, or it also includes when we go to the neighborhoods and they don't have the phone-in that we have here, is my understanding. And so something would have to be set up at those locations.
It relates to meetings of this commission. This commission meets in this room most of the time, but when we are meeting at other locations, Maidu, Mahaney, the various locations, those would not have the remote telephonic participation ability, and that's sort of the purpose of going out to those meetings, is to be in the individual areas. And so that's why we wrote the qualifier in here of when technologically feasible, or however we ended up putting it, which is really in this room as the city council chambers.
Is it possible to do remote call-ins?
It's very expensive, and it would exceed our budget. Extremely expensive, because we'd have to hire a company that would bring in the acoustics, the microphones, and the whole purpose of having the public hearings in those general areas are so people can see the maps. So if they're calling in, they can't see the maps, they can't make comments on specific maps. Let's say we have 4 maps up and available for people to look at, or put their sticker on which map they like the best. That can't occur via telephone.
Okay, and when we go to Maidu or wherever the remote locations are, will those meetings be televised? No.
They'll be recorded for minutes purposes, but the whole purpose is to get the people to come out and look at the maps.
Okay,
It'll
thank you.
be audio recorded or video recorded?
Audio.
Holly?
So if we did approve the resolution today, it would cover 2 meetings. It would cover today and it would cover November. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
I'm looking at the map, or at the schedule of all the meetings, and it looks like we would run into some trouble in January, because our regular meeting is more than 30 days from the other regular meeting, so we'd
We have to re-adopt the resolution.
We're going to have to re-adopt.
adopt it at that time. Okay.
So it would be at future meetings, if this resolution's adopted at future meetings, the other resolutions would look very similar to this one, just have different dates, and your findings would essentially be the same. I also want to clarify, because I think there's a couple of questions, just based on the language about imminent risk to health and safety of the public. The language that's in your resolution before you tonight, I will say, has been adopted by several other public agencies, and this is a model resolution. AB 361 was sponsored by the California Special Districts Association, and they prepared a very similar draft resolution which had this language in there making the appropriate findings related to COVID. Obviously, there's other, if you have a wildfire, an earthquake, or a flood, your city is going to make the other findings. But this language is not new. It is not, it's been through several agencies. And so if there's a concern about this is obviously up to the commission's decision to decide if this is, if there are imminent risks to the health and safety of attendees. But the finding has been made in other agencies.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, in part, didn't that come about for those commissions and districts and whatnot that are not meeting in person yet?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Didn't it come about for those districts and commissions, councils, whatever, that are not meeting in person yet? Because there's a lot of entities still not meeting in person.
Correct. There are a lot of entities not meeting in person. There are also a lot of entities meeting in person that do not adopt this. I'm not going to say it's, one way or the other. There's certainly many examples of both ways.
Is this similar to what Placer County and Rockland have passed in order to continue offering it even while they're offering the in-person?
I don't want to say this is exactly what Placer County and Rockland are passing, but I will tell you that this is the analysis you go through. Is there a governor's declared state of emergency? Yes. Are there social distancing requirements in place? No. Okay, then you have to make a finding that there is an immediate risk to the health or safety of attendees of your meeting. So whether they make the various findings that are before you tonight, they are making a finding that there is an immediate risk to the health or safety of the public.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess this whole, the imminent risk to health and safety, and I'm struggling with that because at the same time, I think there could be some mixed messaging. So if today we say, oh, there's this imminent health risk, so don't come, call in. Oh, but by the way, next month, everybody go to MyDo and look at the maps on the walls. We need to study this stuff together and solicit your input. Well, but just a month earlier, we said there's imminent risk and we shouldn't be together. I don't know. I feel like there could be some mixed messaging there.
Well, wouldn't we be doing the same resolution for the public hearings as well? If this is approved tonight?
Only the ones held here.
Only the ones
Only
held
the ones
here?
held here.
Technological capability.
Is it possible to kind of separate the discussion, about whether it's even possible to offer telephonic participation in the other sites? And we can have the discussion about what's possible telephonically, but then probably agree that we will only do what's possible telephonically?
Well, and I can tell you, really before you tonight, all we care about right now is the next 30 days. And that telephone, we'll have 2 more meetings, to actually talk about those ones in January. But for the time being, we're just talking about for the next month worth of meetings. And, we can certainly reassess the remote locations for in January's meetings.
Plus, the whole pandemic situation might be different by January, too.
Sure.
And
Sure.
we might not need it by then.
And from a, city attorney perspective, our hands are kind of tied with, these are the requirements now. These are the new Brown Act requirements under AB 361, and so this is what we need to do to comply. We either, make these findings or you don't make these findings, and if you don't make the findings, then you go back to in-person meetings. And again, that is, several agencies are doing that. Several agencies are meeting remotely per this AB 361, and so we just wanted to present that for the Commission's consideration tonight.
Prior to March 2020, could a legislative body adopt a resolution allowing the public to phone in prior to coronavirus? Or was it prohibited that they couldn't allow them to phone in?
I would say it was not authorized. I don't know if it was prohibited, but it was not explicitly authorized.
Did any bodies allow phoning in? We never did in
Not that
Roseville.
I'm aware.
I will say I did meetings here for 15 years, and we didn't have any phone-in public comments, and you did them for longer. So
I've been here 23 years.
Yeah.
And we've never had phone-in comments, so.
Are there any other questions from commissioners?
Questions or discussion?
Questions, and I'm going to open it up to public comment, and then we'll come back, and if there's any motions, then we can discuss the motion as well. So if there's no more questions, then we'll open it up to public comment. Seeing none, is there a motion, or do you have?
So-
Usually we'll have a motion, we'll discuss the merits of the motion. Holly, you look like.
I would make a motion that we approve the resolution. And I would do that because children are not vaccinated yet. And we're getting close, the young ones, the little guys, the ones that I'm with all the time. And until we can start getting kiddos vaccinated, I have concerns about the rest of the community. So that's where I'm at right now.
I will second that if you need a second to facilitate discussion.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second on the resolution. And Joe, can you read the resolution?
I can do that. That's to adopt a resolution authorizing remote telephonic participation in meetings pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361 for the period of October 25th, 2021 to November 24th, 2021.
would anyone like to speak to the merits of that? And then if anyone has any discussion to the contrary, they can speak after. Any proponents of the motion?
Again, eventually when we get to the vote, we're going to do it all by roll call. You can vote yes, no, or abstain from the vote.
Can we go in reverse?
I would say, as far as merits go, it keeps the public safe, and I want the public's input throughout. I mean, that's just how I feel. And I don't see the pandemic ending anytime soon, so it may go all the way through. But for me, since it's only the 30 days, and that's the motion, then I think then it's the appropriate motion, and still keep people being able to call in.
And again, the resolution is for if there's technological capabilities. So this meeting, November meeting, and then if we reauthorize it, the January meeting that's going to be here.
In December as well.
There's a December meeting, okay. But the other remote meetings would not.
And again, we can discuss that as it gets closer.
Anybody else have any points of view to the contrary of the motion?
I mean, I guess just sort of relaying kind of what I said before. I don't see the pandemic or anything being different now than it will be 30 days from now necessarily. Perhaps the vaccines have been approved for the children or under 12, but I feel like if we were going to say yes today and then in 30 days say no because we're having public meetings, we want to get everybody out. I just think today, 30 days from now, I don't know, I still think it's kind of mixed messaging. Either it's safe or it's not. If it's not safe, we all shouldn't be here like this.
I agree with Ryan.
Any other comments? Christine?
Yeah. I do think it's important to also look at the public comment we received via email. Considering we may have people at home who hoped they could call in tonight and couldn't do so. The only public comment we really have to consider for this discussion item is the individual who wrote in saying that due to the risk to their health, they would like us to pass it. And I think at the point at which we have someone saying that they don't feel safe participating, to the point that they would email us and say, please allow me to continue participating, I think that we would not be serving them or anyone who feels similarly to them by not taking this action.
Email is a form of communication to the board, so they did communicate.
But email isn't dynamic. Like I could have a lot of new comments based on what I'm hearing, what I'm watching on TV. There's an element of accountability to have a live public comment, which is why AB 361 requires that the public comment doesn't allow you to pre-register. The whole point of saying you don't have to pre-register is that I should be able to, in real time, engage with my representatives, and that's what we are. And even though all of us individually may have a different risk tolerance, and we might have different health backgrounds ourselves or access to vaccines, we have to represent those who may feel differently than us. And at the end of the day, I feel very strongly that we have to protect even those that might see it differently than us and those who don't feel safe coming. And I wouldn't feel safe being in here with unvaccinated, maskless people and then going back to my 3-month-old. So I think that we should be cognizant of what people have going on and what they feel safe with.
In the context of this resolution, are we precluded from just saying, as the IRC, we wish to allow public comment via telephonic? Can we just do, because we're hinging this on health, safety, and imminent danger, when in something that comes up every 10 years, we want to enjoin people to actually participate with us. Is there another way around this? And I know I've gone back into the question portion of our show, but we're using this lever to allow for the telephonic participation today. Is Is there another model that says, even though it hasn't been done in 23 years here, can we, as the IRC, allow that within the construct of our meetings?
So the IRC is subject to the Brown Act. The Brown Act basically went back to normal, as of October 1st, unless you do it pursuant to this AB 361 process. And so that process is there a state of emergency? Yes. Is there social distancing? No. Then you must make a finding that there is an immediate risk to the health or safety of attendees of your meetings. And that's the analysis you get to do. I understand that the commission may be a little bit concerned about making that finding, but that's the way the law is written. And so I do think that there may be future changes to AB 361, maybe some cleanup language going forward. Again, this is all new as of the last month, and it could change a month from now. The state of emergency could be lifted tomorrow, who knows? And then all of this entire discussion would go away. And so that's sort of with the language of AB 361 as it is drafted. That's where we have to analyze it from here.
Is it in response directly to his comments?
Say that again?
Were you going to make a comment? Was it?
I'll wait and listen some more.
Yeah, so I can easily go back and forth on this and come down on both sides of it. But all the other committees within the city, they're all in person. There's no public comment in any other
That's
part
correct.
of the city. Okay.
But just in the city of Roseville. City of Rockland has taken this action, Placer County, countless other cities across the state. I know I personally reached out to other cities in California and asked them and passed on feedback directly to the city council. And in my discussion with different community members and city council members, community members do want to have this option. The ones that I have spoken to, I haven't heard a single person say, I do not want the option to participate telephonically during a state of emergency. I think that's what we should ask ourselves. So for people that want to oppose this, I would like to understand what you would say to someone that does not feel safe coming in about why you think they shouldn't be able to participate because they don't feel safe during the pandemic.
I'll have an answer for that.
Okay.
You can respond and ask questions by email, and we are providing online the tools to do redistricting. We are providing so much material to everyone publicly that they could participate without being here. I think everything that they give to us, we're going to consider. And being right here, I think it looks kind of safe right now, and that's irrelevant. But the idea is that we are doing everything we can to allow them to participate in a very minute way, where they can draw their own maps and they can send in questions when they have the opportunity, and that's my reasoning. That is what my response to them would be. Get online.
I think it's also hard because we actually added an extra public hearing. We're asking the public to come join us. So it's, kind of hard to say in a couple of months, we all want you to come and join us, but it's okay, we feel it's imminent danger for you to be here with us here, and we're all here. We're having public hearings.
Well,
6 of them now.
Right? Maybe we should start saying on all of our events, please don't come if you have been a close contact or if you have COVID-19, because if that's the only way they can participate. I gave public comment at the city council meeting last week, and if I had been a close contact, I would not have been allowed to. And that would have really bothered me because I did a bunch of research. I did contact each city council member directly. I didn't hear back from my personal representative. And there would have been no outlet for me to interact with them without having an option to live address them. And so for us, if any of us are going to not respond to an email, if any of us are not going to hop on the phone with a community member, how else can they address us if they come down with COVID or if they're a close contact?
Are there any,
Just to comment,
To address?
so in November, we're going to be asking people to come and do testimony, right? That's November. That's when it's starting. That's when things are going to get really busy. If we only approved it for the next 2 months, this is the most important time to do it. But I'm
and in
just,
November, we could decide not to
yeah,
do it?
after that point, yeah. But I think we should get to that November meeting because it's one of the most important when we actually will have people show up. I don't know, I'm just advocating for this one today.
Are there any comments?
I'm assuming within all this that staff can handle this. We wouldn't even be discussing it, correct? As far as providing the phone line and a person to
Yes.
address it, yeah.
And my issue is absolutely not with getting people who are uncomfortable to call in via telephone. It's that the IRC is being asked to make a judgment that there is, in fact, an imminent danger to come and speak to us. I don't know how many medical professionals sit on this commission. I'm not one. But we are being asked to, in my view, make a medical decision about that level of danger.
What I was going to say was what we're, to my point of view, what we're recognizing is that some members of the community may be in imminent danger, but not necessarily every member of the community. And we need to make provisions for the extreme cases that may be interested and may not have otherwise an opportunity. Because it's not going to be everybody in the community is not in imminent danger. But there are, my 89-year-old mother, I probably would not want her coming in person.
Fair.
You know.
Did you get to finish what you were going to say? Anybody else?
I have one last thing.
Okay.
Sorry. I feel like we're here for basically setting up an election district. And it has to do with the residents of Roseville. If the residents of Roseville are precluded from being able to call in, maybe some just physically can't come. Maybe the seniors, people that are in the hospital or something. I don't know. I can't make all of this up. But it seems like everyone in Roseville should have access to being able to make a comment. And even if everybody that wants to say something comes here, it could end up being too many. And then somebody will be left outside or something. I just don't want the impression to be that we are precluding anyone from being able to, in essence, cast a vote on how we make our decision. I think it's very important that everybody have a voice. They may not have a vote, but they have a voice. And sometimes people will come up with maps, but when we see these maps, can we ask questions of them? If they're not here and they're not on the phone, we can't ask them, how did they come up with this map? So there's not going to be a give and take if we don't have communication. So I think that's the key. I think everybody needs to be included, and we can't preclude anyone based on, I don't know what kind of circumstances. My first thought is, we have a lot of seniors in senior living facilities, brand new facilities, beautiful facilities, that have a voice and would like to say something about who represents them. And if they can't be here and they can't call in, well, that's kind of against, to me, a Voting Rights Act. So that's how I feel.
Are there any comments to address what he said, or anybody who hasn't spoken yet?
Well, I would say that prior to the pandemic, they didn't have the ability to get here either, and there was no special accommodations made for them.
I would think that because of the pandemic, that might be one positive thing that came out of it, that people found that there are ways to be able to communicate. Before the pandemic, I didn't even know this was on a channel. So because you couldn't make it, now I know that it's on TV, that there's communication available. It's like Zoom. before we didn't know Zoom existed, and now everybody knows about Zoom, well, most people, but not everybody has access to a computer, nobody has, lots of accessibility issues, but I think the pandemic did bring a little positivity as far as opening communication.
We have a motion on the table. If anybody would like to call the vote.
Can I make a comment? Yes. Okay. I love the spirit of the inclusiveness here. Like, I love that everybody's heart is for people to be involved. Having served on like 6 commissions now, I would just say that people do communicate through email. They do communicate through the channels that you've given them. When they know that's the channel, they're usually very good about communicating. My experience has been that people on the commission or the committee, whatever the legislative government is, they receive the information, they read the information, they're getting the information. I know I've always received it ahead of time. Staff has been amazing about making sure that that's true. Historically, and even in when we were looking in the charter at all of this, the community participation, like I feel like we spent, what, like an hour on this? And the reality of the percentage of communication and participation in the community is maybe it's just smaller than most people would think. Like I love the idea that people can, historically they haven't really, even though information has been there. There are no surprises. Anything that's going to be discussed, either you can't vote on it because it wasn't given to the public with enough notice, or they've had access to have all of that information. There aren't a lot of surprises that come up in the middle of a meeting. It's everything that people have been able to go online and look at. So I feel like I understand the wanting that every voice would be heard, but there has been historically great effort made to make sure that people can be heard, and there are those who actually do that. And then there are some that will say, I really want the phone line, and I don't know if they'll ever actually use the phone line. So that's just my thought.
Thank you. All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there a?
Roll call vote.
Okay, does somebody need to call the question, or?
Well, I can restate the motion that it's to adopt a resolution authorizing remote telephonic participation in meetings pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361 for the period of October 25th, 2021 to November 24th, 2021. We have a first and a second. I will call roll. Borowak?
No.
Cusperson?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Griffith?
Yes.
Ledwig?
No.
McPhail?
Yes.
O'Keefe?
No.
Sweeney?
Yes.
Wagner?
No.
Waldrop?
Yes.
Willoughby?
No.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So
Suspense, the motion passed. Motion passes 6-5.
So move on to.
So that's the first item, item 3.1. And yes, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Frank, to move on to item 3.2, which is sort of since we did pass this resolution, now we should consider item 3.2. And
Chair Frank and Commissioners, at your June meeting, you were provided a copy of these administrative standards. In the administrative standards, it set a time limit for public comment on items that are not on the agenda. This action before you this evening is to make sure that our meeting procedures are compliant with AB 361. So the action that I'm asking you to take this evening is, if you look in your packet, we have added a sentence on page 10 of the administrative standards that states that the Roseville Independent Redistricting Commission will not have a specified time limit for public comment for matters not listed on the agenda in order to be compliant with AB 361. So as a way of background, there is no time limitation when you're speaking to an item that appears on the agenda. We can have 30 speakers, they each get 5 minutes apiece. But under general public comment, it's always been limited to 25 minutes. So 5 speakers, 6 speakers at 3 minutes apiece. This allows speakers who call in under general public comment to have an unlimited amount of time long, but still only get 3 minutes under public comment. Again, this does not change the fact that people can speak to an agenda item, and there's no time limitation on that, other than each individual speaker gets 5 minutes. So the perception that people won't be able to comment on items that appear on the agenda is incorrect. We will always take public comment on items that appear on the agenda. The general public comment, which is now, we're taking the time limit off of that, is for items that don't appear on the agenda but are within the subject jurisdiction of the IRC. So this administrative move, because the city council and all the boards and commissions now are imposing that 25-minute time limit for public comment, we are saying that the IRC will not limit public comment to only 25 minutes under items that are not on the agenda.
Any question?
Yes.
And the main reason for changing the limit is in order to not have to sit there doing nothing if there's no public comment
Correct,
coming in,
because if
so we're
we
not sitting
didn't
there for
change
25
this,
minutes.
and we received no public comments under the item on your agenda, which is 4 this evening, we would have to hold the phone lines open and sit here for 25 minutes to make sure that we gave the ample time for people to call in to offer comments on items not on the agenda.
And just for everyone on the commission's reference, it sounds like a silly interpretation, and this has been talked around a lot in the legal community amongst several lawyers, and that's the consensus of everyone is that, yes, you must follow your entire public comment period. So we would be sitting here for, if there was no public comment, we'd be sitting here for 25 minutes in silence. And so if we make this change tonight, you would not have a 25-minute restriction. It would just be, okay, if there isn't any, then we can move on. Or if there is, then they can speak forever.
Yeah. So there is no time limitation, so if you had 30 people call in, we'd have to take all 30 people's comment, which I think is the spirit of the commission to begin with. You want to hear from everyone. So I'm asking that you pass a motion this evening to amend the meeting procedures specific to the IRC, doing away with the time limit for public comments.
Which in a way actually limits that empty space of points. Any questions for staff on this?
I have a question. Is there also an option, I know one of the council members had mentioned to me in my discussions with them, that there's also an option of just adding something to meeting procedures about a certain period of time after the last commenter. So instead of saying no time limit, I mean, I'm in support of adding this, but if people want another option.
I think what they were speaking to, Julia, were under public hearings. The mayor can have the discretion to say, I'm going to limit the appellant to 20 minutes and the applicant to 20 minutes. We won't be doing that here. What we're trying to set up is the fact that we won't sit here in silence.
Yeah.
And we want people to participate. Again, this does not affect an agenda item. This is only for public comments that come in on items that are not on the agenda.
Gotcha. I guess just if someone opposes it, I think that there was something that they were mentioning, talking with Ms. Scheidenberger about in terms of adding to the meeting procedure. So I think, that's only a comment from me if people don't want to allow this, but I support your guys' resolution as done.
Are there any other questions regarding this resolution?
Not a resolution. This is a motion to amend
Sorry.
meeting procedures.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the motion to amend meeting procedures? Now, do we need to move it first? Okay. So if there's no more questions for staff, would anybody like to make a motion?
I will so move.
Okay. Do you want to read the motion or have staff read the motion?
To approve an amendment to the administrative standards, adopting a version that does not have a public comment time limit and allows for remote telephonic public comment for meetings held in the city council chambers in order to be compliant with AB 361.
That would be it.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Are there any comments from the public? Seeing none, are there any comments from commission before we vote?
Okay,
Call roll.
Borowak?
Yes.
Cuthbertson?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Griffith?
Yes.
Ludwig?
Yes.
McPhail?
Yes.
O'Keefe?
Yes.
Sweeney?
Yes.
Wagner?
Yes.
Waldrop?
Yes.
Willoughby?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Motion passes.
So on the remaining items, the public has the ability to call in this evening. As well, they will in November.
So the next item, number 4, is public comments. If there's anybody in the audience who'd like to make a public comment, and if anybody would like to call in, the number is 916-774-5353. Sonia, how long does it usually take
Well,
if
there's
someone does call?
typically a time delay of about 30 seconds from when you're acting here, when it gets televised. So there's our 30 seconds. We have our first call.
Let me transfer you to the microphone, just one moment.
I believe it.
And Sonia, just for clarification, this is for general public comment and has a time limit of
3 minutes.
3 minutes per speaker.
You've reached the IRC meeting. If you'd state your name, you may make your comments now.
Thank you. This is Lisa Larkin, Roseville resident for 20 years, and I want to say thank you for passing this resolution and allowing us to call in. I personally have almost 90-year-old in-law parents that I help care for 24/7, and I cannot expose them. So when I have to come to the Roseville City Council, that potentially allows me the opportunity to transmit COVID to the people that are compromised. So I appreciate you passing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there's another call.
Okay, just one moment, and I'll transfer you.
You've reached the IRC meeting. If you'd state your name, you may make your comments now.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Crawford, and I am also calling in to thank you for your comments and your vote tonight to allow telephone comment. It's very important. Many of us in the community are not blasé or ignoring the continuing factor in this community right here in Roseville of the number of people who are in the hospital, the number of people who have died. Over 410 people have died in this county because of COVID. And although things are improving somewhat, they are not improved to a point where many people feel that they can resume their lives as normal. The fact that we did do telephone comments for 19 months is an indication of the fact that many people do want this form of participation. It's especially important for the Independent Redistricting Commission since it only occurs every 10 years, but it's also important for our City Council and others to be observant of this. So again, thank you. I appreciate your consideration for those of us who are still quite concerned and worried about the level of COVID transmission in Roseville. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody, any other callers?
No?
Okay, so that ends public comment. Our next item is number 5, minutes. Previous minutes have been distributed. Are there any changes or comments to the previous minutes? I seek a motion to pass the minutes.
I move that we accept the minutes.
Second.
A motion and a second.
Borowak?
Yeah. Yes.
Cuthbertson?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Griffith? Yes. Ludwig?
Yes.
McPhail?
Yes.
O'Keefe?
Yes.
Sweeney?
Yes.
Wagner?
Yes.
Waldrop?
Yes.
Willoughby?
Yes.
All right, minutes are passed. We'll move on to item 6, reports and presentation. 6.1 is Independent Redistricting Commission training, community outreach presentation.
And we'll just wait for them to be queued up on the video screen.
And who is they?
Flow Analytics, a representative, and Selena from Redistricting Partners. On the screen right now.
Yes, good evening. This is Jed Roberts. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
And just out of curiosity, are the folks up at the dais, are they able, or sorry, at the counter up there, are they able to see us on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Small screens. Okay, great. Just curious. Again, my name is Jed Roberts. I'm with Flow Analytics, and we are partnering with Redistricting Partners. And I have with me Sophia Garcia, GIS and Outreach Specialist. And we'll be taking you through a presentation tonight regarding community outreach and training on the mapping tool that we'll be using as we begin to take public input on maps. And so I'm going to go ahead and show my screen. And if I could just get confirmation that you're seeing that title slide.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Sophia to take us through the first few slides here. And Sophia, I think you're muted.
Thank you so much. Okay, yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening and for getting ready to listen to our presentation. Like Jed said, my name is Sophia Garcia. I'm with Redistricting Partners. We're partnering on your contract, and we're going to cover a couple of things this evening. We'll review the redistricting basics as we do in all of our presentations. We'll talk a little bit about the structure of the Independent Redistricting Commission. We'll go through the timeline, the traditional redistricting principles that we'll use when we are drafting maps and the final map. So all of the maps that will be presented will be utilizing those principles. We'll talk about communities of interest, what that means, how folks can give comment. Jed will talk about the map tool and give a demonstration, and then we'll also talk about how the community can give feedback and on the communities of interest. He'll also talk about the census data, how we have the current lines of the city, but also utilizing the 2020 data. So we're going to see kind of how things have shifted, what are the deviations, and then also we have the hearing schedule for members of the public to come forward, attend the meetings, and give comments. So quite a robust presentation that we'll go through. And again, Jed and I will partner on this. So we'll go to the next slide. So what is redistricting? So we have the commission here. We have some familiar faces and may also have some familiar faces and people joining us from the public. But redistricting is the process of adjusting district lines every 10 years after the release of the US Census. So we are in a really strange year. We would have normally received the census data at the end of March, but due to the pandemic and the Census Bureau needing more time to look at the data and analyze it, we didn't receive it until the end of August. And then the statewide database had to do some changes for the prison reapportionment population. So we really are working in a really compressed and concentrated timeline due to the late release of the census. So thank you again for joining us, even with that timeline. Some more well-known examples of redistricting that folks may hear nationally or statewide are our congressional and state legislative districts. And those in California are being handled by an independent redistricting commission. Other states do it differently, but here in California, we have a 14-member commission. But local governments must also go through this process as well. And the city of Roseville is going through this process to rebalance their city council lines. And as a kind of a reminder to the commission, to ourselves and the public, that beyond creating districts of equal population, redistricting also serves to empower communities and preserve voting rights. And there is, this cycle, more of an emphasis on community outreach, transparency. And so this is becoming more of a trend as we go through the redistricting process. So we'll go to the next slide. So the Independent Redistricting Commission, this we got all from your website and from your meeting minutes. So if you want more in-depth information on the commission, please go look at the minutes and the website. There's a lot of wonderful information there. But the Independent Redistricting Commission, you may also hear it referred to as the IRC. 8 members were originally randomly selected by the city clerk from 4 quadrants, and 2 members were selected per quadrant. The 8 commissioners then appointed 3 at-large members, and then they appointed 5 alternative members. So quite a robust commission that we have for the city. So we can see here the names of everyone, 2 people per quadrant, the 3 members at large, and the 5 alternatives. So go to the next slide, please. So the structure of the commission consists of 11 members and 5 alternatives. In a public setting, the city clerk randomly selected the initial 8 members from the commission from a qualified pool of applicants, 2 each from the region, as we saw from the previous slide. And then again, the commissioner selected the 3 at-large and the 5 at-large alternatives. What the commission is in charge of is to conduct community outreach hearings, which is one that's happening this evening, to identify communities of interest from public input. And Jed will walk us through how we will kind of analyze and look through that community of interest input that we received throughout the process. They will also draft new city council maps from communities of interest input, and they are the body that has the final say in adopting new city council boundaries. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So Jed's going to walk us through the timeline and the dates here.
Thank you, Sophia. So here is a visual timeline of the redistricting process with meetings and deadlines color-coded here. And so I just want to point out that we are here on October 25th, and that our next meeting in November will be focused on reviewing community of interest testimony and map submittals from the public, as well as any potential map submittals from commission members. Then at our December meeting, we'll narrow the maps to a few viable options that will serve as the backdrop for the public hearings that occur in January. And then just moving toward the end of the process here, based on that public feedback, the IRC will move to choose a final redistricting plan for adoption, which could be one of the draft maps from December or a new map that better reflects public input. And so this timeline is available on the website for folks who want to look at this in a little bit more detail. Back to you, Sophia.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that slide and that graphic. I love seeing all the dates there. So the traditional redistricting principles are a range criteria that we will be utilizing when we draft maps and also for the final plan. They are criteria that are used nationally and have been upheld by courts, and they are the best practices for this process. They're also the ranked criteria that is under the Fair Maps Act, which is that new California law that requires cities and counties to follow it. It's also known as AB 849. So we'll go through all of these briefly, and then the next couple of slides will really be focused on that concept of communities of interest. So the first criteria and why we're here and why we had to wait for the census data is that criteria of creating districts of relatively equal size. And when we talk about size, and what that means is we are looking at people, not citizens. So in the census data, we're looking at the total population of people. And also when we talk about census data, we are also talking about census geography. So we want to kind of think of those as the same thing. So as Jed will show you, we receive the census data in a hierarchy of geographies, the smallest one being census blocks. And those are the best practices to not split those census blocks, because if we look at that criteria, it's to create districts utilizing the census data, and we receive the census data at the smallest unit is those census blocks. So if we were to split a census blocks, we wouldn't truly be utilizing that census data. So that's something that I'm sure will come up and could be a topic of discussion. And we really hope that folks become more familiar with that census geography. The second criteria is to create districts that are contiguous. And this means to create districts that are touching one another, unless you have a county, like a county unincorporated area or an island. You want to make sure that all of the districts don't hop or jump over any area. Maintaining communities of interest has been a criteria that is uplifted during this particular redistricting cycle. It's about understanding that community input and the input from the city of Roseville and the commissioners are really valuable, and that you all experts of your city of Roseville. And that's a criteria that the commission can look at to see about maintaining communities of interest and not splitting them if they have the ability to maintain them in a single district. Another thing that the commission can look at is to look at other government data, such as county boundaries or school district boundaries, high school attendance areas. Those are other data sets that are available from the county, from your city, and from the state. And that's something that the commission or members of the public can talk about. And Jed at Flow or Redistricting Partners, we can look and try to incorporate those in the next discussions. The next criteria is to keep districts that are compact. And this we can think about in two different ways, in appearance or in function. But in California, we have a rather elegant definition for what compactness is, and that is to not bypass nearby population for far away population. So that is to look at your areas of your district and to kind of look at what is the population that's around the district that you're trying to create, and not trying to pass a freeway or a park or another area to get other population in your city. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So communities of interest, again, it's a concept that it's kind of the phrase in the redistricting process that really means listening to community input and listening to members of the public is something that should be uplifted throughout this process. It's an understanding that narratives and how residents of the city of Roseville operate with the city is really valuable throughout the process, and are narrative pieces that we can't necessarily just get from census data. It's about bringing like-minded people together for representation, and it really is the building blocks of districts. So draft maps will again be utilizing that community of interest input. Some communities of interest can include culture and language minorities and a number of other groups. And because we are talking about people's narratives or stories that they may come forward with, we want the commission, staff, and consultants to remember that communities of interest are subjective, and that we want folks to remain open-ended and as inclusive as possible as we're listening to testimony. As we're going through this process too, we may hear competing communities of interest. So we may hear people who are communities of interest but have different interests. And for those, it is the job of the commission to then have a discussion and give direction to the consultants on which way we should go after hearing that testimony. Some communities that are covered under the Voting Rights Act for race and ethnicity are Latinos, Asians, and African Americans. And if we were to draw a Voting Rights Act district, it would be based on one of those three ethnicities, because in California, those are the ones that have the most population where we would be directed to draw a Voting Rights Act districts. However, it's really important to remember that race cannot be the predominant factor in drawing district boundaries unless legal counsel directs us to draw a Voting Rights Act Section 2 district. So we may have folks who are listening who may really identify with their race or ethnicity as a community of interest. And the following slides, and we have some questions which hopefully will help you think through additional ways that you can talk about your community of interest so that the commission can utilize it throughout this process. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So there's a wide variety of examples of community of interest testimony that you may hear that people can come forward with: historical communities, school districts, as we mentioned, rural or agriculture areas, neighborhoods. So there's really, the sky's the limit on what kind of testimony we can hear coming forward. So we'll go to the next slide, please. Oh, next, yeah, okay. So another thing to remember or keep in mind throughout this process is the Fair Maps Act, which is that California law, otherwise known as AB 849. You can Google it with using either of those names. There are some things that explicitly prohibits the city of Roseville commission from utilizing as a community of interest. And so those three things that the commission will be prohibited from using or being considered as a community of interest are political party affiliation, incumbents, and political candidates. So what does that mean? That means if a member of the public comes forward and identifies themselves as being from any one of these three groups, the commission will be disallowed from utilizing that in their draft maps or their final plan. So we understand that members of the public, it's your right to come forward and speak to those who represent you. However, it's the job of the commission to follow state and federal laws throughout this redistricting process. And this is one of those criteria that's new for this redistricting cycle under that new law. It's also difficult to consider communities of interest that are citywide throughout this process. So we are talking about creating districts, and we are talking about looking at the city council boundaries and rebalancing them. So if a member of the public comes forward and says, the whole city is my community of interest, that's wonderful that you have really awesome pride with your community and the city. However, I implore you to think about if there are pockets of the city that you identify with, neighborhoods of the city, particular parks. And this also brings up that you don't have to just have one community of interest that you come forward with and testify. It can be multiple. You can submit multiple emails, call in multiple times, show up to these meetings. And so you're not limited just to one communities of interest as your public testimony. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So I kind of alluded to some questions that may help the public think through their community of interest testimony. And these are three questions that we found to be really helpful, specifically when members of the public are giving testimony for the redistricting process. So the first question we implore folks to ask is, does the community have a shared culture, characteristic, or bond? And this is a really wonderful question also to ask yourself if you want to come forward with race or ethnicity as your community of interest. And so if you can think of other common bonds that bond your community together beside your race, it could be if you all go to a similar place or frequent similar workplaces or utilize the same streets on your commute. Those could be additional things that may have your community have shared characteristics. The second question to ask is, can the community be mapped? Does it have geography? And this is a really important one, specifically for folks who are giving verbal or written testimony, because we don't want to misinterpret what your community of interest testimony is. We want to be able to capture it. We want to be able to consider it while we're drafting maps and while the commission is listening and directing the consultant to draft maps. And so if you could give us specific street names or specific locations, boundaries of your community, that'll be really helpful as we go forward in this process. If you kind of come forward and mention like a store name, but not a geography, that may make it difficult for us to kind of include it in the mapping process. And the third question to ask is, how would you describe your community's relationship with the jurisdiction and how it is affected by policy decisions made by elected officials? So the Independent Redistricting Commission is the commission that will adopt the final map. However, the jurisdiction that we're discussing is the City Council. So asking yourself, what is your community's relationship to the City Council? Is your community of interest currently split between multiple districts? Is it currently kept together? Are there negative or positive effects that you have as a community. And so again, these are 3 questions that we find really helpful to ask yourself or ask your community members when you're coming forward to give your public testimony. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So the next couple of slides kind of serve as a little quiz or just like a fun way to get folks thinking about what kind of testimony they can come forward with as their communities of interest. So I can't see anybody online, so I'll just pause a little bit, and if folks at home or in the boardroom want to discuss amongst yourselves, please feel free to do so. But again, these kind of serve as a primer for what we may hear throughout this process. So the first question I'm going to ask everybody, and if you were kind of paying attention to the previous slides, you may automatically know the answer to this. And so the question is, a group of renters who live downtown testify to the city's Redistricting Commission. Could renters be considered as a community of interest? So we'll go to the next slide. And if you said yes, you're absolutely correct. So this group of residents can easily be mapped. They're in a distinct area, and they share a common policy interest, which can be addressed through legislation or public services. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a meeting that lasted 9 hours, and about 7 of those hours were public comment period on a rent control ordinance. And I heard really passionate testimony from renters and from homeowners and tenants. And it was a wonderful example of competing communities of interest and just the kind of the passionate testimony we may hear throughout this process. So absolutely, renters can be a community of interest. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So a historically recognized town dating back to the late 1800s, but now has minimal population, is within the lines of the county. So should the Redistricting Commission prioritize this historical town when drawing their maps? We may also think about this if there was an old part of town that maybe is now more serves as tourism, or it has less population because instead of housing people, there may be more shops. That could be a way we can think about this. But could they be considered as a community of interest, a historical part of your city? So we'll go to the next slide, please. Definitely, historical communities are recognized as communities of interest and could be considered when drawing maps, even if the population is less than the previous census, but they could definitely be considered as a point of interest on the map. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So we have a couple of more, and we can see they're pretty different from one another, and that's on purpose. So the next one is a group of bicyclists have a focus on ensuring there is ample bike lanes, clean streets, and lights in their neighborhood for safety. It's getting darker where I'm from, and so kind of street lights along the streets would be helpful and would be nice. So could this be considered as a community of interest? Folks who are interested in bike lanes and like safety when they're out recreating. We'll go to the next slide. So definitely, this is a group of people who share geographic location and public services. They utilize the city. They may actually have a wonderful stance on which streets maybe need more cleanup than others, but definitely this group of bicyclists could be considered as a community of interest. And we have one more, pretty different, but we'll go to the next slide, please. It makes people laugh a little bit too when I say it, so that's okay if you're chuckling a little bit. And the last one is a statewide group for people who are fans of the San Francisco Giants testify to the local city redistricting commission. So if you're Giants fans, you may be a little sad right now, but that's okay. But could they be considered as a community of interest for the commission? We'll go to the next slide, please. So this one's a no, and I'm gonna talk through a little bit why it doesn't make sense for them to be considered as a community of interest for the city. So it's important that a community of interest is distinct enough to draw on a map, and this group overlaps throughout the entire state, and could potentially overlap throughout the entire country. And it's unlikely that any governing agency has any say over who we kind of choose to root for in the baseball league. So if we think about this in another way or another context, let's say there's an adult recreation league who has an interest in more lighting at a particular park, or more interest or more investment in a particular area or outdoor recreation place. That could make sense as a community of interest for the city because they're interested in the way that the city functions and needs of the city, and there are residents who already utilize city services. So statewide group of fans doesn't make sense for the city of Roseville, but if there are folks who live in the city, utilize city services, that could definitely make sense as a community of interest. So we'll go to the next slide, please. And I think this one's my slide, and then I'll have Jed, he'll follow up with the presentation. But so we've talked through communities of interest, and I hope you are kind of thinking through what you are going to talk to the commission about. And there's multiple ways where you can submit your testimony. You can definitely do so this evening during the hearing. And another way you can submit your testimony is via an online form, which can be found on the Roseville Independent Redistricting Commission website. And it's an online form that has questions that it'll ask you, and the commission will be able to see all of the surveys that have been submitted, and those can be uplifted when draft maps are being produced. So we'll go to the next slide. And Jed is gonna take over from here and talk more about the public maps and the data. So we'll go to Jed.
Okay, thanks so much. So now we're going to talk about map submissions and the ways that we can do that. Exciting day tomorrow, which is when we will be making available to the public the mapping tool. And so this tool can be used by the IRC and the public to draw districts that help to preserve those communities of interest that we heard about. So the mapping tool, as it stands right now, is already loaded with some communities, like neighborhoods, school districts, and it's really helpful in quickly showing which communities are or are not preserved within a district. And just so the public and the commission is aware of flow analytics, we can add communities to the mapping tool in response to testimony that comes in. Again, just kind of hearkening back to how important it is to include information about those specific boundaries to aid us in providing those as a map layer. So again, just going back to our three friendly questions here, really again helpful for folks to think in terms of this as the mapping tool is being utilized because it is actually a tool in and of itself to preserve those communities of interest. So now I'm going to get into a series of maps, my favorite part as a mapping analyst. So this is the map of the city of Roseville's current 5 districts, just here in different colors. And what we've done on the next map here is we've created essentially a heat map to show where we've seen more or less population change since the 2010 census. And this is by census block, so that most granular geography, as Sophia mentioned earlier. And what we can see here, sort of spatially, is that certainly District 5 is showing more of those warmer colors and more of those blocks that tend to be in that higher range of change in population. So from 250 up to the maximum that we see of 646 additional population over that 10-year period. You can also see that there were some areas that did actually lose some population, but in general, throughout the city, we actually saw a population gain in each of the 5 districts here. And so the next few slides here just get into a bit more detail to update you on a document that was provided earlier in the process here. And this reflects the changes that Sophia mentioned with respect to the statewide database that was released that adjusts for prisoner locations, mapping them back to their last known addresses. So we didn't see any major changes here. This is a relatively small adjustment for the city, but these numbers here do reflect those latest numbers that we must use for this process within California. And I just want to, point out some of the differences here that we're seeing from, the ideal deviation, the ideal population that we'd like to see for the districts here. And again, it's really District 5 that is kind of jumping off the map, as it were, as really having an increased population that we're going to need to work to redistribute. And so these slides here are really just more for folks' reference, both breaking out total population and citizen voting age population. Citizen voting age population does become a consideration if the city were directed to look at a Voting Rights Act Section 2 seat. That's not something that has been directed at this point, and we are not anticipating it. And again, just continuing through each district here, so you can see those specific statistics, not only across just the overall population and citizen voting age population, but across race and ethnicity as well. And then finally, District 5 here. And so at this point, I just want to reiterate the opportunities that we do have for public input going forward. At any stage here, we are, of course, welcoming community of interest testimony. But as I also mentioned, another opportunity for input is to actually submit a map online. And that is, again, a new requirement within the California Fair Maps Act. It's a little bit different from last time. So I'm going to very shortly here bring up the district scenario modeler, which is a flow analytics tool that we have developed to aid in redistricting. And I just want to remind folks of some of our criteria here. So again, census blocks, those are our geographic units. And as Sophia mentioned, we do not want to be splitting census blocks. And as you begin to play with the map tool, you'll see that it is very possible to meet the next piece of this here, which is relatively equal size, that being less than 10% total deviation between districts. You're able to do that quite easily with using census blocks as those minimum geographic units. Again, contiguity, we want to make sure that these districts don't hop or jump over each other, maintaining our communities of interest, which has been a big focus of ours tonight. There are the existing administrative lines, some of which are already loaded into the tool. And then again, just that compactness that we want to just make sure that we respect and make sure that we are not passing populations that are nearer to include populations that are further within our districts. And I'm just going to highlight verbally here just some of the key features of the district scenario modeler before I give you a demonstration. So it calculates population deviation and the demographic information on the fly as you're making updates to your districts. So you'll see that happening in real time. It's really a filter-based tool, meaning that there are many ways to filter down to specific groups of blocks that you're interested in for a number of different reasons that can help you then build out the districts. It's going to show which communities are preserved or are not within a single district. And again, we have some preloaded, and we'll be working to include additional communities of interest as that testimony comes in. It allows you to save where you were and come back later to continue working on the map. I can say that that's really helpful if you're in a county process where there's lots and lots of blocks. But I think for the most part, you should be able to sit down in a single session and get a lot of good work done for the city of Roseville. And of course, very importantly, submitting a map and being able to attribute it to yourself. And also include a map description that may include a description of a community of interest that you're trying to preserve. As we begin to take in map submittals, we'll actually be creating a map gallery where the commission members and the public can see what else have been submitted. That is not yet set up, but when we do see a few submittals come in, we will convert the web page to show that map gallery. And then it's the last bullet here, but really very important. Please be a user of the user guide. That's a live link there. If you got a digital version of this, then you'll also be able to find it very prominently on the webpage that will stand up for this starting tomorrow. And so at this point, I'm going to move to the demo here. So let me I'm going to briefly stop sharing and make sure I have the right screen up. Okay. All right, so you should be seeing a web browser now that is titled the City of Roseville District Scenario Modeler. And again, as mentioned, prominently displayed up at the top is our user guide. And I actually do want to walk folks through the user guide a little bit just to point out some of the elements of that. And then I'm going to show you how some of that functionality works on the map tool itself. So if you click this user guide link in the browser here, it will bring you to this page. And we have just a single user guide set up here for a different geography. So we're not remaking these for every different geography that we're working in, but all the information here is relevant to what you'll be doing with the tool. So at the top of the user guide is just the kind of feature overview where we just lay out the overall functionality, where you'll find things within the tool, and the different types of things that you can do with it. And they're nicely numbered here for folks, so you can see which section is referred to on the left-hand side in the narrative of that piece of tool functionality. The next section here delves in a little bit more into actually navigating the map. There's lots of ways that you can get at the areas that you're interested in and pan around and go back to the full extent of the map. And those are shown here in a little interactive image here. So I recommend taking a look at that full image just to see the different kinds of things that you can do to navigate around. Very important functionality is actually assigning those census blocks to a district. And so this is a little bit of a two-step process here. You need to first unassign the district from, in the case of the Roseville tool, we're starting with the existing districts. So you'll need to unassign and then assign to a new district that you would like that block or set of blocks to show up in for the calculation. And again, we've got a little interactive image here that shows you how you can go about doing that, the type of pop-up that you'll see in the web browser that allows you to make that reassignment of those blocks. Now, I talked about filterability. It's a very important part of this tool and allows you to investigate blocks in a number of different ways. One of those ways is to filter by different groups of blocks that have different ranges of population. So it actually becomes, for instance, very useful to know which blocks actually only have 0 population. There actually are a handful that don't have any population in them. So those actually don't become that important from the standpoint of achieving equal population. And then there are, of course, the blocks that have quite a bit of population relative to the others. And this part of the tool allows you to see those different blocks. You're also able to filter by race and ethnicity, by percentage within the blocks. And so I'll show you that. I think it's a little bit more helpful to see that live in action here. But again, we've got the interactive image here to show you how to do that. And then I mentioned the ability to isolate a community of interest and actually assign that community of interest into one of the districts. And so I'll show that again live. I think that's helpful to see. But this is actually a tool that I really prefer to, or approach I like to use to help to build out my districts. And again, you have that interactive image there, so you can watch and follow along. And then finally, when you've completed your map, there's a couple of different things that you can do. If you haven't quite yet completed your map and you want to save it as a draft, there is a small button that's a little bit hidden and maybe not that hard or that easy to see, but it's 3 little dots. And if you go to this user guide here, it will really show you how to hone in on grabbing that link. But it's ultimately what you're doing is you are generating a link that will capture where you were when you were drawing your map. And you want to make sure that you copy that link, email it to yourself. You have the opportunity to do that after you click the share button. Different things that you can do to make sure that you copy that link. Now, once you have come to a map that you're happy with and you'd like to submit, you can click the Submit Your Map button after you've pasted in your link. It will actually drive you down to a short survey form where you can, again, attribute the map with your name and a description of that map, as well as identifying which district that you're currently in, if you'd like to identify that. And then at the very bottom of this user guide page is a link to support for the district scenario modeler. So that will email our team if you're seeing anything that's not functioning as you are expecting it to, or you're having a problem saving your map. We can pull that information out for you. Or for instance, if you submitted your map and can't remember the link, we'd be able to help you out with that. So that's the user guide. Please spend some time with that. And now I'm going to go back to the landing page for the district scenario modeler and show you a little bit about how this works in real time here. So I've scrolled down a little bit, and what you'll see now on the top of the map frame here, below the title, is some of our key and friendly facts about the city here. So the total population, 147,969. Our number of districts, 5 that we're trying to rebalance. And if you divide that total population by 5, our ideal population per district is the magic number of 29,594. So that is what we measure against as we are developing districts of relatively equal population. The next set of kind of pull-down menus that are just below those friendly facts about the city allow you to either look at the existing boundaries or enter into a mode where you are drawing new boundaries. And for somebody who's coming to this website for the first time, you're actually seeing the same thing for both of these in this case, because we have elected to have the existing boundaries be the starting place for drawing the 5 districts. There's also the ability to filter by those districts. And again, as I mentioned, filtering is important for this tool. And right here, I'm just going to go ahead and filter to only the first, only District 1 here. So you just see that showing up. I'm going to turn off that filter. There's a few ways you can do that. You can click this little X button here to go back to showing all values. So we're going to see all the districts again. And then there's a pull down here to allow yourself to flip between total population. And again, if you were interested in seeing citizen voting age population, if you were to click that, you will note that the population numbers that show up in these little donuts, as we call them, for each district now represent just that citizen voting age population. Again, total population is what we're calculating the total deviation to right now. And so I just want to highlight that important number in red here that you see currently based on the existing lines. The total deviation is 62.6%. That's quite a deviation. And the way that we arrive at that, as I scroll down and I see that, again, District 5 as 45.8% above the ideal population. And then we look and we see that District 1 is 16.8% below. And if we add those two numbers together, as those being the two furthest apart, we arrive at our total deviation of 62.6%. Now, again, I want to go through a little bit more of the filterability here. And in this case, I can go to this pull-down menu and look at different race and ethnicity. And this works alongside with this slider bar here. So I'm actually going to select white. And I'm going to push this slider bar to select a new range or hone in on a different range of blocks that have, as I'm moving this forward to the right, a higher percentage of white population. And here I'm going to continue moving this till about 70%. So what you're seeing now are blocks that have greater than 70% white population. And I can just drag that back to reset that. And now I'm again seeing all of the blocks in the city. And so you can move that slider from the opposite direction as well if you wanted to just look at blocks that have a small percentage of white population. I mentioned that blocks by population category is another way of filtering. I'm just hovering over right now, but I can click as well to highlight this. These are blocks that have 0 population. There are 199 of these blocks. And so just a tip that I have for folks is if you ever find yourself in a place where you're filtering and you want to unfilter, just go ahead and unclick the last thing that you clicked to create a filter. And so that's all I've done there. Now, if I want to see the blocks that have 500 or more population, there's 26 of those, I've isolated those by by clicking this filter right here. Now I'm going to go down to communities of interest. I think I'm going to focus on neighborhood associations. This is one that I used to practice a little bit with. I like to get familiar with the city and find out different ways that I can keep communities together. So what you'll see here is a list of neighborhood associations, and then you'll see a green check mark or a red X. And the green check mark tells us that that neighborhood association is currently preserved within a single district. But we see that Kirby-side right here is actually split between districts. And if we hover over, we're able to see a breakdown of what that split is in a tabular form. If you click on it, you are actually able to isolate that area on the map. And then you can zoom in and see that, in fact, that neighborhood, I'm going to choose the pan tool here to move around a little bit better. That neighborhood is split currently between District 1 and 2. And so if I wanted to select a part of this, what I can do is use some of these selection tools. I'm just going to use this rectangle selection tool here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select those blocks that are currently within District 1. And I'm going to go ahead and remove those blocks from District 1. So now they show up as gray. And they also show up here in the donut icon as unassigned. I can use that same tool and I can go back, select those unassigned. I'm going to hover over. It's telling me that it's currently assigned to unassigned, but I want to go ahead and assign these. If I can jump over there really quickly. Oh, I've been told this can happen from time to time here, but I will let folks know on our developer team that it's happening a little bit with this one. But essentially what you can do is go ahead and make that assignment over to district number 2, and you will see these two donuts now collapsed to only show district 2, and you'll see now that Kirby Ranch would show up as a green check mark here. And again, apologies for that assignment being a little bit weird for me right now. It seems to jump away every time I want to go to it. Interesting behavior. So with that, I'm actually going to unclick Kirby side here and go back out. And I can, at this point, go home. And I can see the entire district now. And also note that those remain unassigned since I was unable to assign that. So it's always good to check and see if there's that 6th category to make sure that you have actually assigned all of the blocks to a district. And so also as you are selecting different ways, there are many different ways to select or filter as I've shown here. If we just want to look at everything but District 3. We also see that these tables over here, the selection detail will automatically update to whatever's being selected. So in this case, we're seeing only the total population for everything except District 3 in this case. And then finally, if I were to want to save this right here, there is this 3 little circles connected. And you can go ahead and click that link, which will pop up this link. And that's what you want to, in fact, copy. And you can close out of that, or you could email it to yourself. I like to do that. You want to make sure that the current view is selected, which it is automatically. That's what you're currently working in. You can close that. You can paste that here. You hit enter, and it reminds you to do that. And then you can go ahead and submit your map. And it'll bring you down here at that point to enter in your first name, select in your district, tell us a little bit about the map. And again, here's where you can paste that link if you want to just go ahead and paste it that way. If you click the submit your map, it'll actually just jump you down to this survey section here in case you hadn't noticed it was down there. And again, you can save your draft, which is just essentially saving that link for yourself for where you were. And that, I think, covers the main features here of the district scenario modeler, which we will be getting put out tomorrow. And I believe that'll go out as a notification through the city's email notification for this process. And at this point, I think I'm going to turn it back to Chair Frank.
Thank you, Jed and Sophia. At this point, I'd like to offer an opportunity for our commissioners to ask any questions of Jed and Sophia about the mapping tool.
I have a question about the little district donuts. On the outside of the donut, there's that the markings on the outside, but there's not really a legend that describes what that's supposed to represent. Can you? Am I missing something, or?
No, you're not.
Okay.
Sorry. No, Commissioner, you're actually not. What those indicate are the different race and ethnicity, and if you hover over, it will actually bring up a little pop-up that does tell you which race and ethnicity that is and the population it accounts for within that district.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And another one, what happens when somebody reaches out to DSM support? Is it a chat, or is it you send an email, a question? What happens when someone wants to request that?
Thank you for that, Commissioner. It is an email that will go to us.
I've just got 2 questions. So looking at the data of the 2020 census versus the citizen voting age population, I know you mentioned something about the Voting Rights Act and, that the CVAP data is important for that. For District 5, should we pay any extra attention to the huge, the difference between the census data in 5 and the voting age population versus the difference in the others? Or should we we don't need to worry too much about the citizen voting age population when drawing our map, since it doesn't impact deviation?
Correct. You don't need to worry about it for this process here. It is a data set that is often of interest to folks, but it is not the basis for which you should be drawing your maps or trying to achieve equal population.
And is that something you see a lot, that there's like a less than half difference? Is that just like we've got a lot of young children or immigrants and that aren't yet citizens? Is that just what would explain that?
Yeah, that could certainly be part of what would explain that. I haven't dug into those particular numbers for that district, but I could certainly look into that a little bit more if that's of interest.
I was just curious. And then in terms of adding those communities of interest that you mentioned, does that happen dynamically, or will that happen kind of all at once after the next meeting, or what's the turnaround on feedback we get from public comment, live or submitted?
Yeah, so city staff are providing community of interest testimony as it comes in to us as well. And so what we're doing is evaluating those for actual mappable layers that we can include. And so when we find one of those, we'll actually make that update before the next meeting and include that. And I think perhaps there's a way for us to communicate that back to the commission that those updates have been made. I think that's important that we do have a way to let you know that because I wouldn't want to wait to include that information if we could earlier on with the mapping tool.
Awesome. Thank you.
One more kind of a comment and a question. The community of interest, the PDF, the downloadable PDF, I played around with it today, and there's that submit button that's at the bottom didn't work for me. I tried downloading it, and then I tried using it like in my browser. Is that something that's going to go live tomorrow? That's tomorrow, right, when it goes live?
It's live right now.
It is, okay.
Yeah. What
So it
browser
should
are you
should be working.
What browser are you using?
Chrome.
Oh, should work.
Okay, I'll try it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for clarification, the mapping tool itself is currently live?
It just went live a few minutes ago.
Okay, so we can go home and start using it. And then can only Roseville residents use the map? And how do we verify that someone's a Roseville resident?
Well, we can look them up in their district. It
Because they
should
give their,
only be
they give their
Ro-
names.
Yeah. It should only be Roseville residents.
And you mentioned web browser, which web browser? Are there any web browsers that maybe don't work as well? Do you have any suggestions? And also, on a cell phone, on a smartphone, can we do it just as easily on a smartphone as on a laptop or a desktop?
Yeah, so I do recommend Chrome, although I have not heard that there have been any particular problems with other browsers. But that is our recommendation. And I do not recommend drawing on a phone. It is possible. The Chrome browser, for instance, on your phone would work. It's just a little bit tiny to work with. It does work better with a tablet if you were going to go with that type of technology.
And in your work with other cities, about how many maps would a city of our size expect to get, either from commissioners or from the public?
Yeah, so as a comparison, I would say, you could see anywhere from 5 to 20 over the next month. That would be kind of my ballpark from what I've seen in other cities.
And this might...
Commissioner Frank, during the last districting, we had 28 maps submitted in 2019.
And this may be a question for staff. Can members of the public, if they don't have a laptop or a desktop at home, can they go into the public libraries and use it there as well?
Yeah, it's web-based, yes.
Okay. And lastly, we have a freeway and a railroad that runs right through our city. How do you recommend we address that in terms of trying to keep things contiguous and not hopping over? I mean...
Yeah, so fortunately, the census blocks have not been drawn to straddle either of those features. So you won't find yourself in a position where you do need to have a geography that goes across that, at least for the purposes of the geography being broken down in that way. You may need to make decisions on whether or not a district crosses over those for equal population reasons. But you do have that break in the geography itself at those, both the railroad and the highway.
So we can jump the railroad and the highway in order to mathematically get that population?
Correct. In fact, I think you likely will need to.
Sorry, I had so many questions. Does anyone else have any questions? Now, this is for information only, correct? We will open it up to the public for public comment. The telephone number is 916-774-5353. I'll give it that 30 seconds and just point out there is no one in the audience for public comment.
They're all playing with maps already.
They're drawing their maps right now.
I will close public comment. Any further business or other questions from staff or commissioners?
Well, I just wanted to point out that we did add a Saturday public hearing, It's on January 15th. The reason that we scheduled that date is because the turnaround time, if we were to hold it on the following Saturday, would only give Flo a day or two to recalculate those maps. So the Saturday public hearing, oh, we have a phone call. Saturday public hearing, it'll be at 2 p.m. in the afternoon in the council chambers.
You said we do have a call?
City Independent Redistricting Commission, is this Mr. Constant? It is, great. Let me transfer you to the intercom, okay? Just one moment.
Good evening. You may state your name and make your comments now.
Hi, this is Pete Constant, Roseville resident and a former member of the Charter Review Commission that was instrumental in creating the recommendations to include the charter amendment that created the Independent Redistricting Committee. I've got just a few comments to make. First, in the presentation that was made, there was quite a bit of reference to the traditional redistricting principles and the AB 849 Fair Maps Act, but there was never really any mention of the language in the city charter, which has additional language that was framed by the Charter Review Commission and ultimately passed by the voters. One of those Chair Frank just referenced, and that's how to deal with freeways and highways. If you look in the charter measure, there is a specific charter language that defines crossing a rail yard or a highway as being non-contiguous for mapping purposes for this process. Second, I think that it's really important. There was a lot of discussion at the Redistricting Commission about the way the original maps were drawn. Many people from the public, and including myself, feel that the process to draw the former maps were a little overly influenced by the residences of the elected officials that were currently sitting on the council. And it was expressed over and over that if you start with a set of bad maps and start drawing maps adjusting boundaries that, by all accounts, had a lot of problems, wouldn't meet many of the criteria in the Fair Maps Act, it makes it more difficult. So I'm wondering why we are starting, instead of with a blank slate, we're starting with maps that many community members and many members of the Charter Review Commission had issues with the way they were drawn. And as you can see, a lot of the conversations we had about extreme deviations have come to fruition with the 62.6% deviation. My last comment is about questioning people's residents and how they submit maps for review. And it was mentioned that it would be checked to see if people were Roseville residents. That would be almost impossible to do. If you have somebody who recently moved to Roseville, maybe as a non-citizen, is not registered to vote, is renting a room in a house, they may not show up anywhere that the city could check as being a resident if they are, and they have a clear interest in perhaps representing the community's interest. So I would caution the Commission in any attempt to qualify people who submit maps based on some form of verification that hasn't been defined. So those are my comments. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you who stepped up to be on the Independent Redistricting Commission. I think it's a very important body, and I look forward to the results of your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we have either Jed or Sophia address at least one of the questions regarding, can we start with a blank slate if the commission chooses to do that rather than the existing districts? And then also, in your view, in terms of the charter language about jumping highways and freeways. And I wasn't 100% clear on Pete's comment regarding clarifying whether someone's a resident or not. Pete, I couldn't tell if you wanted stronger verification or not to verify at all.
I can sort of clarify. I'm not sure if Pete's still on the phone. Section 11.9 of the city's charter, subsection B talks about, to the extent practicable, council districts should be geographically contiguous. Areas that meet only at the points of adjoining corners are not contiguous. Areas that are separated by water and not connected by a bridge, tunnel, or regular ferry service are not contiguous. Areas that are separated by a rail yard or a highway are not contiguous. So that is language in our city charter. So thank you, Mr. Constant.
We do have another phone call.
Can you also address the clarification in terms of residents? Is there any discussion about
I thought
where you think we should?
Yeah, I thought he was saying that you should not, because it's...
I would say I would not create that restriction. Again, I don't know if it's possible to even understand if someone was a resident or not, or what that would factor into the whole situation. It's just a submitted map for the commission to be able to consider.
And it can be from anyone in the state or the
Correct.
world. Okay.
And your question about the starting point?
Blank slate.
Yeah, Jed and Sophia, can you discuss that in terms of where we start?
Yeah, Chair Frank. We could provide a blank map for folks to start with. We just find that it tends to get folks started going a little bit easier if there's already some districts on there. It could also be just a different set of district maps if you wanted something that was, for instance, already really close to equal population. That's something that we could provide as a starting place as well. It's really at the direction of the commission how you'd like that to show up as a starting point.
I personally would prefer that Flow does not provide something, because that's kind of, we got into trouble with that last time. And but can you, if again the commission would like to do that, give us an option to start as a blank slate?
Absolutely.
Any comments about? And when would that be able to be live? That option?
I would work with our technical team. I think we could make that live tomorrow.
And there's another phone call for public comment?
I'll transfer your call now, okay?
Hello, you've reached the IRC. If you state your name, you make your comments now.
Hi there, Lisa Larkin. Thank you. I called as soon as you said public comment, but there is a bit of a delay on channel 73. So I just wanted to ask a question on the mapping tool. I took part from beginning to end in the last mapping, and the public supported map did not get selected. However, I had submitted a map and saw a better map. Just finished collaborating on the Placer County district maps and have submitted that as well. But my question is, on your mapping tool, can you, when you make a copy of the link, is there the possibility of taking a map that you like or that the public supports, but maybe there's a few tweaks that need to be made, of saving it as your own copy, making the tweaks, and then resending it in?
Yes. So when the map gallery is launched, when we get a few public submissions, you will be able to use that as a starting point and then resubmit from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other callers? All right, any other questions? Looking good. Staff, anything else? All right, I seek a motion to adjourn until, when is our next meeting?
Our next meeting is November 22nd.
Seek a motion to adjourn to November 22nd?
Move to adjourn.
A second.
Been moved and adjourned. See you all on November 22nd. Thank you. Thank you. Night. Work.